His name is Paul. If you've done anything in the Bible before, you might have heard of him. And he writes this letter to Christians in this place called Ephesus. He writes this letter to a bunch of people who are already believers in Jesus, who are already followers of Christ. And so what we get is there's three portraits in this canvas, in this scene, three vignettes, three pictures that we're going to see. And I guess the first portrait that we get a little glimpse at as he writes this letter is in the first couple of verses. And the portrait is the portrait of alienated humanity. The portrait of alienated humanity. Have a look, Ephesians chapter 2, sentence number 11. Therefore, remember that formerly you who are Gentiles by birth and called uncircumcised by those who call themselves the circumcision, that done in the body by the hands of men, remember, sentence 12, that at that time you were separate from Christ, excluded from citizenship in Israel, and foreigners to the covenants of the promise, without hope and without God in the world. Now, this is a picture of alienated humanity. You kind of had these two people groups spoken about in there. You've got Israelites, you've got Jewish people, and you've got Gentiles, which is basically a description of those who weren't Jewish, who didn't belong to the nation of Israel. If you know anything about the Bible, the first half of the Bible, the Old Testament, is all about God's dealings with the nation of Israel. And they were his special chosen people in the Old Testament. These Christians in Ephesus were Gentiles. And so what is it actually saying here? It's actually saying that once, before they were Christian, they were actually separate from the promises of God. They were separate from citizenship in God's family. They were separate from the family of God. They were without hope and without God in the world. You know, what it is it's a picture of alienated humanity. It's a picture of people cut off not just from one another, but ultimately cut off from God. Alone, lonely, alienated. And so the picture here in sentence 11 and 12 is a picture of what they were like before they became Christian. And it's a picture, if you're here today and you're a Christian, it's a picture of what you were like before you became a Christian. You were alienated, cut off from the people of God, cut off from the promises of God, cut off from relationship with God. And it's also a picture, if you're here today and you're not a Christian, it's actually, whether you've heard it like this before, it is actually a picture of where you're at now. There's a sense in which you don't have God in your world. And so sentence 11 and 12 is not just describing what Christians once were, it's describing what you are now if you're not a Christian. You know, as I read these verses, as I read about the alienation of human beings from one another and together from God, you know, I think it reminds me of, you know, even though we've got all these connections today, even though we've got all these outlets for relationship virtually and via our phones and all these contacts, at its heart, so many of our relationships have actually been marred, have been fractured. We've been alienated. We've been cut off from one another. You right now have relationships and have friendships where there's actually unspoken grudges of past hurts. You know, there's this brokenness that is under the surface. That brokenness and those unspoken grudges between you and other people is even more so between you and God, between us and God. And so in these three pictures that we get, the first picture is a portrait of alienated humanity. And if we were to stop there, it would be a hopeless picture. But we're not going to stop there. There's hope as you continue to work your way along these pictures. And so the second portrait is this portrait of the peacemaker, the portrait of the peacemaking Christ. It's a portrait of what Jesus has done. It's a portrait of what Jesus has done to actually bring relationships back together, to bring friendships back together, to bring people back to one another and to bring people back to God. Have a look at it quickly, beginning at sentence 13. Let me read quickly the next paragraph and a half. It says, sentence 13, But now, in Christ Jesus, you who were once far away have been brought near through the blood of Christ. For he himself is our peace, who has made the two one, and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility, by abolishing in his flesh the law with its commandments and regulations. His purpose was to create in himself one new man out of the two, thus making peace, and in this one body to reconcile both of them to God through the cross, by which he put to death their hostility. He came and preached peace to you who were far away, and peace to those who were near. For through him we both have access to the Father by one Spirit. You know, there's kind of a whole bunch of things going on in those verses there, in those sentences, and there's no way in the next few minutes we can actually plumb the depths of everything that's going on there. So there might be questions that I'm not even going to attempt to answer what is going on in there. By all means, talk to the person who brought you along. Come and chat to me afterwards if there's questions you have in particular of things that we're not going to touch. But did you get the idea of kind of what happens? The general gist? Sentence 13, those who were far away have been brought near. You know, Jesus brings people who are distant and brings them close. Jesus, sentence 14, turns two into one. He actually reconciles two groups of people. You know, there's this smashing down of a dividing wall of hostility. You know, as I read these verses, it's hard for me not to remember a significant event from when I was 9 years old. In 1989, you now know how old I am. In 1989, one of the most significant events of the later parts of the 20th century happened in November. As a 9-year-old, I can still remember watching it. There was a big fat wall between East Germany and West Germany that had divided the people for a long time. And it was taken down. And it was this joyful occasion with amazing scenes. I can still remember them. And there was just this significance of this dividing wall of hostility between East and West, such that these two people, East and West Germany, you know, but within a year, they were a new country and they won the Soccer World Cup as Germany. You know, there's no longer East, there's no longer West. They are this new nation, this new people. There was enmity, there was disconnect, there was broken relationship between the two. Yet it is smashed down and relationship is restored. You know, what's going on here in sentence number 14 is far, far greater than East and West Germany being reunified. It is far, far greater. You know, the wall that is being smashed down, the dividing wall of hostility, is ultimately pointing to something that the Bible again and again refers to as sin. The Bible says there's this dividing wall of hostility between people because of sin. And there's actually a dividing wall of hostility between people and God because of sin. Now, what is sin? There's a whole bunch of ways that the Bible describes sin, but there's a sense in which it's a very relational term. There's a sense in which it's a term of being out of relationship with the God who made us. You know, we're out of relationship with the people around us, but even more so, out of relationship with the God who has made us. We're disconnected from friendship with God. You see, ultimately, what that is at the heart of sin is where we actually reject God and His rule in our life, His right to be our boss and in charge, and we actually set ourselves up as God. You know, some of you might be sitting here thinking, look, hey, I'm not some militant atheist who throws rocks at Christians, and, you know, I'm not some person who's out there writing hate blogs about Christians, or even our indifference is actually a sign of our rebellion against God. We might be fairly nice people, but we've actually turned our backs on Him. We've disconnected ourselves from the life source. We've disconnected ourselves from the one who has made us. And because of that, there is this wall, there is this dividing wall of hostility, not just between people, but between people and God. And the really good news, though, is that Jesus is the peacemaker who has come to smash down that wall. Sentence 15 there, he talks about how his purpose is to make one new people, one new mankind, one new humanity. Not just that Gentile people have to now become Jewish, but that Jewish and Gentiles, all people, all nations, can now become part of this one people of God, be brought into the one family of God, together be united to one another, and then together as those united to one another, be reconnected, brought back into relationship with God. You know, this is a remarkable thing that Jesus has done to bring peace. Reconciliation is what is going on. Reconciliation, not just between people, but between people and God. And so it's a picture of restoration, restored relationship, peace after war, peace after hostility. And so I guess the question at this point is, how is it that Jesus brings this peace? How is it that Jesus creates this new humanity? What has Jesus done to bring about this new friendship that's available to all? What has Jesus done? Well, Jesus himself has come. And it's all about Jesus. In sentence number 13, it's all about Jesus' blood. In sentence number 14, it's all about Jesus himself being our peace. And then in sentence number 16, it is through the cross. It is through Jesus' death on the cross that he brings people who were once far away near. He brings two warring parties together and he brings them together back to God. It's through his blood shed on the cross. It's through his blood spilt to make friendship and peace possible. You see, what you need to understand, I'm not sure if you've studied it much before. I'm not sure if you've reflected much on the death of Jesus on the cross. But 2,000 years ago, God did something radical to bring about reconciliation. God became a man. God put on flesh. God humbled himself and became a human being. God, in the person of Jesus, as we meet Jesus, we see God come among us. And as you meet Jesus, you see someone that has experienced all the emotions, all that is wrapped up with being human. You know, he was tired, he was hungry, he was angry, he was sad. He did all the things that we do and took on everything that we have taken on. Yet he was different from us. You know, Jesus is like us in every way, except for he never sinned. He was always connected to his Father. He never broke relationship. There was never a dividing wall of hostility between Jesus the Son and God the Father. And so Jesus actually comes along and comes to die on a cross. And why does he do that? I think Jesus comes to die on that cross actually as a peace offering, in a sense. It's God actually sending his Son to say, let's be friends. Let's reconnect. God actually at the cross is sending us, not to sound crass, a friend request. He really is. It's God's way of taking the initiative to reconnect with us, to bring us back into relationship with him. You see, as Jesus dies on the cross, the Bible describes it as a death for sin. That is, as Jesus dies, he takes upon himself not the penalty for his sin, because he never sinned. He takes upon himself what we deserve for our sin, the judgment that we deserve for disobeying God, rejecting God, setting ourselves up as if we are God. And so as Jesus dies on that cross, as he is executed, that event 2,000 years ago, Jesus is taking upon himself what we deserve. He is the innocent one, dying in our place, the guilty ones. And he does it to reconnect us. He does it to draw us back, not just to one another, but also to God, to bring relationship back. You know, it's actually as if there's this massive chasm that has happened when we've been disconnected from God. It's as if here we are, and here God is, and there's this massive gap, there's this massive chasm, there's this massive wall, a dividing wall of hostility, and there is nothing that we can do to bridge that gap. There is nothing that we can do to knock down that wall. You can't try to be a good person, you can't try to pray enough times a day, you can't be charitable, you can't work your way back to God, you can't do anything to bring yourself back. Jesus in his death on the cross is the only way